It was late evening when the marble halls of the Whitmore estate carried a sound no one had ever heard within its walls. The voice of little Isabella. For 6 years, the girl had lived in silence. No laugh, no whisper, no broken word ever crossed her lips. Doctors from London, Paris, and New York had come, shaking their heads with clinical sorrow. Specialists had prescribed therapies, medications, and endless patience, but nothing had loosened the invisible chains that bound her voice. To the world, Isabella was the mute daughter of Gregory Whitmore, the reclusive billionaire, whose empire stretched from real estate to technology. To Gregory himself, she was his only reason to breathe, and his greatest heartache. That night, returning earlier than expected from a board meeting, Gregory paused at the heavy oak doors of the music room. He hadn't stepped foot inside for years, not since his late wife's piano had been covered with a velvet cloth like a tombstone for their memories. He only meant to walk past, to reach his study, and drown in another glass of aged whiskey. But then he froze. A melody drifted through the crack of the door, soft, trembling, like candlelight in darkness. And then another sound. A voice, high, pure, childlike, singing. Gregory's hand trembled as he pushed the door open an inch. His breath caught. There, bathed in the dim golden glow of a chandelier, stood the black nanny he had hired only months ago, Ms. Celeste Johnson. She was holding Isabella's hands, swaying gently with her, guiding her like a mother would. Their eyes were locked, their lips moving in unison. And Isabella, his daughter, his mute, voiceless child, was singing. The moment hit Gregory like a blow. His knees weakened, his heart thundered, and for the first time in years, his stoic mask cracked. Because in that fragile duet, half song, half miracle, he realized 2 things. His daughter had found her voice. And it wasn't because of him. It was because of her. The nanny. The woman the high society guests had mocked him for hiring. The woman his business associates whispered about behind cigars and scotch. The woman who, with nothing more than patience and love, had touched his daughter's soul where millions of dollars and specialists had failed. And as Gregory leaned silently against the doorframe, torn between awe and fear, he knew that life in the Whitmore estate was about to change forever. The Whitmore estate was less a home and more a fortress of glass and marble. Perched on the cliffs of Newport, Rhode Island, its terraces overlooked the restless Atlantic, waves crashing against the rocks below like distant drums. From afar, it looked timeless, like a European castle transposed onto American soil. But inside, silence ruled. Gregory Whitmore had built his empire on numbers, logic, and calculated risk. Everything about him reflected that discipline. His tailored suits, his clipped tone, even the austere order of his study where bookshelves towered with ledgers and global finance reports. Yet, for all his wealth, the one thing he could not purchase was the voice of his daughter. Isabella had been born into wealth but not into joy. She was a porcelain child, delicate in frame, with eyes that mirrored the pale blue of her late mother's. When her mother, Helena, died during childbirth complications, Gregory became both father and widower in a single breath. He poured every resource into Isabella's care, flying specialists from across the globe. But nothing had changed. At first, they said, she will grow out of it. Then, it may be selective mutism. Later, perhaps trauma. Eventually, they stopped promising anything at all. So the house grew quieter. Gregory threw himself into work, compensating for his failures at home with victories in the boardroom. Isabella, guarded by rotating caregivers and tutors, drifted like a ghost through gilded halls. By 6 years old, she had never spoken a word. When Celeste Johnson arrived, no one expected her to last. She was unlike the others, not trained in elite academies, not European or Ivy League polished. She was a woman of warmth, with soft brown skin and eyes that seemed to see more than anyone wanted to admit. Born in Georgia, she had raised younger siblings in hardship before working her way through nursing courses, though her path had never been straight. Life had given her both scars and songs. Gregory's associates sneered privately when he hired her. A billionaire with all the world's choices, and he picks her? One board member whispered over a round of golf. Gregory ignored them. He hadn't hired her for society's approval. He had hired her because of the way Isabella had clung to Celeste's hand at their very first meeting, something she had never done with any nanny before. At first, Celeste kept her distance. She learned the rhythms of the household, studied Isabella's routines, and spoke gently even when the child offered no reply. She read aloud during study hours, her voice rich and melodic, whether Isabella seemed to listen or not. She sang softly while tucking her in, hymns her grandmother once hummed in their small Georgia church. The staff noticed subtle changes. Isabella lingered longer in rooms where Celeste was. She reached for her hand without prompting. She smiled. Gregory noticed, too. One morning, as he rushed through breakfast, he glanced up from his tablet to see Isabella standing at the window, with Celeste, watching the sunrise. The child leaned lightly against the nanny's arm, her small face untroubled. Gregory had been struck by how natural it looked, as if Celeste belonged in the picture all along. Still, he said nothing. He wasn't a man who dealt in feelings. Weeks passed, and the estate's silence began to shift. In faint ways at first, a hum echoing down the hallway, a child's laughter, wordless, but closer to sound than before. Gregory's chest tightened each time he caught those glimpses. He dared not hope. Hope had betrayed him too many times before. But on the night he opened the music room door, everything changed. For it wasn't merely sound he had heard. It was music, and in music, Isabella had found the bridge between her silence and the world. The Whitmore mansion had always echoed with quiet. But now, there was something new inside its walls, something not quite noise, not quite silence either. It was the faint hum of songs drifting through hallways like sunlight slipping past heavy curtains. At first, Gregory dismissed it as coincidence. He assumed the staff left radios on, or that Celeste, like many caretakers before her, sang out of habit. But over time he realized it was deliberate. Always, the humming or singing centered wherever Isabella was. It was not background noise, it was connection. A house awakens. The mornings changed. Instead of finding Isabella in her room staring at the wall, Gregory would glimpse her padding barefoot into the kitchen, following Celeste. The girl would sit at the marble counter while Celeste prepared breakfast, watching her with solemn eyes. Celeste would tell stories as she worked, her voice warm, her words flowing like river water. "And you see, Miss Bella," she said once, her southern cadence soft and rhythmic. "The peach trees back home were so sweet. Bees would dance themselves dizzy trying to claim them first. My sisters and I would climb up barefoot, grab what we could before Mama caught us." Gregory, reading the morning paper nearby, pretended not to listen. But when Isabella's lips curved into the faintest smile, he felt something stir inside him, something dangerously close to hope. The music room. One evening, Gregory lingered later at the office than usual. By the time he returned, the estate was dark, save for a warm light spilling from the east wing, the music room. He had not stepped foot in it for years, not since Helena died. The piano had been her instrument, her release. Gregory had closed the doors, shutting grief away. Now he stood outside them, frozen. A sound floated through the heavy oak, soft, careful notes on the piano, not masterful, but deliberate. And over it, a voice, Celeste's, low and steady. You are my sunshine, my only sunshine. He dared not move, breath caught in his throat. Then he heard it, something impossible. A second voice, fragile, trembling, like glass struck gently. But a voice, nonetheless. Isabella's. You make me happy when skies are gray. Gregory pushed the door open slowly, afraid it was a dream. His daughter sat beside Celeste on the piano bench, tiny, fingers pressing hesitant keys. Her lips moved. Sound, real sound, poured out. Celeste didn't stop. She kept singing, eyes never leaving Isabella, encouraging her with a smile. Isabella sang louder, her small voice cracking, uncertain, yet radiant. Gregory's knees weakened. For years he had prayed, pleaded, cursed doctors and fate alike. And now, here it was. His daughter's first words, not spoken, but sung. Doubt and fear. The following morning, Gregory's emotions were tangled. Joy burned in him like fire, but so did fear. What did this mean? Was it fleeting? A miracle that would vanish as quickly as it appeared? And what of Celeste, the woman responsible? The household staff whispered about it too. They had all heard Isabella's voice drifting through the mansion. Some were awestruck, others skeptical, a few resentful. She's only a caretaker, one of the maids murmured in the kitchen. What if she's filling the child's head with strange ideas, singing like that every night? It isn't proper. Gregory overheard, but said nothing. Yet the words gnawed at him. His world was one of control, image, and respectability. He could not ignore how society viewed him, a powerful millionaire, yet vulnerable enough to have his daughter healed not by a specialist, but by a black nanny from Georgia. The garden encounter. A week later, Gregory invited a colleague from the board, Arthur Penrose, for an afternoon meeting at the estate. They walked the gardens, discussing investments and expansion. But Arthur's attention wavered. His gaze drifted toward the lawn, where Isabella sat in the grass with Celeste, threading daisies into a chain. Arthur smirked. Remarkable, Greg. The girl actually seems alive. Quite the change. Gregory bristled at the tone. She is alive, Arthur. Arthur raised his brows. You know what I mean. I just wonder, do you plan to parade her around with her caretaker as well? I don't imagine the club would understand. Gregory stiffened. The words dug deep, not because Arthur was right, but because he echoed Gregory's own hidden fears. He dismissed Arthur quickly, but the doubt remained. That night, Gregory confronted Celeste in the hallway. You're doing something with her, he began, voice sharp. I don't know what, but it's working. And yet, he faltered. Celeste met his gaze calmly. It ain't a trick, Mr. Whitmore. Children don't bloom on command. She's bloomin' 'cause someone finally stopped waiting for her to be what she ain't, and just sat down with who she is. Her words cut through him like glass. He had built towers of wealth, walls of marble, but perhaps what his daughter needed was never wealth or walls. Perhaps it was simply someone who sang. Isabella's secret song days turned to weeks. Isabella grew bolder. Though she still spoke no words in daily life, her singing voice blossomed when she was with Celeste. She learned nursery songs, simple melodies. Celeste began teaching her rhythm with clapping games. Laughter, real laughter, filled the mansion's halls for the first time in years. One evening, Gregory discovered something even more astonishing. He returned early from a business dinner to find Isabella alone in her room, humming faintly to herself. Not with Celeste, not with anyone, just herself, in the dim glow of her nightlight. Tears stung his eyes. She wasn't merely copying. She was becoming. Society's backlash news of Isabella's change reached further than the household. Word spread among Newport society. Gregory was stopped at galas, boardrooms, even charity dinners. "Your daughter sings now? Extraordinary," one patron gushed. Then, with a careful pause, "And I hear it was your housekeeper who made it happen?" The question always carried weight. Admiration tinged with doubt, praise laced with prejudice. Gregory smiled politely, but inside unease brewed. Could he withstand the scrutiny? Could Isabella? And what of Celeste? Did she understand what storms she had stirred? Gregory knew one thing. The world would soon force him to choose between society's expectations and his daughter's fragile miracle. The evening began like so many others, with a gala. Gregory Whitmore had been urged, begged even, to attend. The Newport Charitable Society's spring ball. It was the kind of event where fortunes shook hands, where reputations solidified. To miss it would be an insult. Gregory had planned to go alone, as always, but Isabella, for the first time, tugged at his sleeve when he told her he would be gone. Her wide eyes pleaded without words. And then, miracle of miracles, she whispered, soft as a breath, "Stay." The sound pierced him to his core. Her first spoken word. He nearly cancelled everything in that instant. But Celeste, standing quietly in the doorway, placed a hand on his arm. "Take her," she said gently. "Take her with you. The world needs to see." Gregory hesitated, torn between fear and awe. Yet somehow he agreed. The ball. The ballroom glittered like a jewel box, chandeliers dripping crystal, gowns swirling in silks and satins, the air humming with polite laughter. Gregory arrived in a tailored black suit, his daughter's small hand clutching his. Gasps rippled through the crowd at the sight of Isabella, who had not been seen in public for nearly 3 years. Arthur Penrose was the first to greet him, his smile tight. "Gregory, a surprise to see you, and with company." His eyes flicked to Isabella, then to Celeste, who followed a respectful step behind. The pause said everything. Gregory's jaw tightened. He was already regretting this. But then the orchestra struck up a familiar tune, and Isabella's head turned. She tugged at his hand. The song was one Celeste often hummed at night. Gregory froze as Isabella pulled free, walking toward the musicians. Murmurs swept through the guests. Some whispered in delight, others in scandal. And then it happened. Isabella climbed a small step by the stage and opened her mouth. She sang. At first, her voice trembled, but Celeste moved forward, kneeling, just close enough for Isabella to see her. The girl steadied, her tone rising, pure and astonishingly sweet. A hush fell over the ballroom. Dozens of Newport's finest stood frozen, transfixed. Gregory felt the world tilt beneath him. He could not breathe. His daughter, silent for so many years, was filling the room with sound. And not just sound. Music. Society reacts. When the last note faded, silence reigned. Then applause broke out. Polite at first, then thunderous. But not all faces were warm. Arthur leaned toward another gentleman, muttering, "It's charming. Yes, but imagine the scandal. A millionaire's daughter tutored into speech by—" "Her?" His glance flicked toward Celeste. Gregory caught it. For the first time in years, something inside him snapped. He had endured whispers, prejudice, the suffocating rules of his class. But watching Isabella beam, her cheeks flushed with joy, he realized the truth. Society had never given him anything that mattered. Celeste had. He stepped forward, pulling Isabella gently into his arms. His voice rang out clear and steady. "My daughter has found her voice, and she found it not through money, not through doctors, not through privilege. She found it through love, through music, and through Celeste." Gasps rippled. Heads turned. A few clapped. Others frowned. But Gregory didn't care. He turned to Celeste, his eyes shining. "You have given me back my child." Celeste's gaze softened, tears brimming. "She gave herself back, Mr. Whitmore. All I did was listen." The breaking point. Arthur sneered quietly, but Gregory didn't falter. For the first time, he did not care about reputation, business, or legacy. He cared only for the girl clinging to him, and the woman whose courage had drawn her voice into the light. He lifted Isabella higher, turning her toward the crowd. "This is my daughter, and tonight she has sung her first song. That is all that matters." The applause swelled, genuine this time. Yet Gregory's focus was not on the glittering room, nor the people whose approval had once meant everything. His gaze remained on Isabella, her lips still curved in a smile, her eyes bright, her tiny hand reaching back toward Celeste. It was the hand of trust, the hand of gratitude. And Gregory knew. The world had changed forever. The carriage ride home was silent, but not heavy. It was a silence of awe, of exhaustion, of something too sacred for words. Isabella leaned against her father's chest, her small hand still hooked around his arm, her eyelids fluttering as though even dreams could not compare to what she had just lived. Celeste sat across from them, hands folded tightly in her lap, her face unreadable. She had seen miracles before, small ones, quiet ones, but never something like this. Never a child whose silence cracked open into music before the eyes of an entire ballroom. Gregory met her gaze in the shifting lantern light. For a long moment, neither spoke. Finally, he whispered, rough with emotion, "I owe you everything." Celeste shook her head. "No, sir. She owed herself a voice. I just helped her find the door." The morning after news traveled faster than gossip in Newport, and by morning the story had spread. The Whitmore girl, once silent, had sung before. The entire society. Some papers called it a marvel. Others, more venomously, whispered about peculiar influences in the household. Gregory read them all at his breakfast table and then folded them away. Once, those words would have consumed him. Now, they felt like echoes from another life. He looked across the table where Isabella sat, humming softly to herself as she sketched on the corner of the paper. Her voice, her hum, her very presence filled the room with light. What could scandal matter against that? Celeste entered quietly with the morning tray. She paused, watching Isabella hum. Her eyes softened, But she did not intrude. Gregory rose abruptly, surprising even himself. "You will sit," he said firmly. "This house owes you more than service. You are family now." The words stunned the table into silence. Isabella clapped her hands in delight, laughing, a sound Gregory thought he might never tire of. Shifting tides. Not all accepted it easily. At church, certain families turned their heads when Celeste walked in alongside Gregory and Isabella. Invitations to luncheons dwindled. Arthur Penrose sent a polite but unmistakable letter, warning Gregory of social consequences. Gregory burned it in the fireplace. He had spent too long living for the approval of men who measured worth in titles and bloodlines. Now, he measured worth in the way Isabella's face lit up when she sang. In the quiet strength Celeste carried with every step. And though the road ahead promised isolation from old circles, Gregory felt freer than he ever had. The garden scene. Weeks later, on a spring morning, Gregory found Isabella and Celeste in the garden. Isabella stood among the roses, her voice ringing clear as she sang a nursery tune, laughter spilling between verses. Celeste clapped along, her joy unguarded, her dignity unshaken. Gregory stood at a distance, watching. The sight pressed tears against his eyes. He realized then, wealth could buy estates, paintings, jewels, but it could not buy this bond, this trust, this rebirth of a child once lost in silence. That had been given freely at the cost of nothing but patience, love, and courage. He stepped forward, pulling them both close. For the first time since his wife's passing, the Whitmore family was whole. Not the same as before, but perhaps stronger. The lasting impact years later, society would soften. Even Arthur Penrose's grandson would invite Isabella to sing at a gathering, his words carefully chosen to frame her as a gifted young woman. But by then, Gregory no longer cared about society's slow acceptance. What mattered was the Ida music echoing through his halls, the laughter drifting down from the garden, the knowledge that his daughter had found her voice. And when Isabella, in her teenage years, spoke at a school recital, she introduced Celeste before beginning her song. She believed in me before I could believe in myself. Celeste wept quietly in the second row, while Gregory stood tall, his heart full. The legacy of the Whitmore estate would no longer be measured in wealth. It would be measured in a girl's voice, clear, strong, undeniable, and in the courage of a nanny who listened when no one else did.